the executive director of the Central Kootenay Food Policy Council, and grew up on a farm in the Okanagan, and I've been working on food systems for a really long time, well, for 30 years in the Columbia Basin. And so I'm really happy and thrilled to be able to bring together 4 really dedicated and brilliant individuals who are going to speak from their perspectives. But I'm going to start us off with a little bit of a high-level overview. So I'm going to share my screen as everyone's used to with Zoom. So the topic is, how food secure are we? And as I said, I grew up on a farm in the Okanagan, actually. And when I was a kid, there was an amazing local dairy. There was a local ice cream manufacturer. There was a cheese manufacturer. There was a rendering plant. There was a flash freezer for vegetables. There was a tree fruit marketing co-op. There was all kinds of infrastructure in place that enabled us to, our farm and many other farms in the area, to actually have viable operations and access markets and help feed the region. I think that as a child, we were probably far more food resilient than we are now. We might have had less options in terms of food because there was more of a local focus on local food. But things have changed. And I'd say in the last 15 years, the trend has been moving back towards how we rebuild the important components of our food systems. So I'm going to move on to the next slide, which is a diagram that you'll see I developed in 2008. So it's somewhat dated, but I think it's still entirely relevant to this work. Food systems are incredibly complex, and we've shredded out so much of the key pieces of the infrastructure, including the knowledge base. And so rebuilding them all is a complex effort, and it takes many different actors and a lot of time and effort. And so this is not the definitive diagram for relocalizing food systems, but as you'll see on the right-hand side, there's more the sort of the production end of things. At the bottom, it's some of the support systems for rebuilding the knowledge base and the infrastructure. And on the left, I designed it to be the sort of the menu of options that local eaters and consumers could actually participate in order to help make the rest of the diagram and the food system work. Anybody's interested in looking at this more closely, you can follow up with me afterwards, and I'm happy to share it. But I think it in some ways conveys that there are very many different components that need to be put in place in order for us to rebuild resiliency in our food systems. And happily, I think we're moving in that direction, but it's a lot of work. One of the main things that the Food Policy Council does in collaboration with our many partners and council members is we tackle the policy realm of food systems, as well as the analysis of how it all fits together and the structural pieces that need to be put in place. So I'm quite thrilled to be able to share this diagram with you. It has the back of it has information about what food policy is, but for most people, food policy is very opaque and they don't understand what a key structural piece it is, because policy barriers can be really significant, or they can really enable people to be able to access the kind of food that they want, for slaughter plants to be able to function, for our farmers to be able to operate effectively on the landscape. And so a lot of the work that the Food Policy Council does is to try and clear up all the confusion about what food policy is and where it resides. And so this diagram has an ostensible sort of food system landscape with questions that relate to all the different levels of government and different agencies that have some piece in oversight in regulating how our food systems happen. So that's the role that we play, and ultimately all of our food systems analysis and policy work is very much driven by the work of farmers, of food processors, of different aspects of our food economies, and then the folks that we collaborate with, like Kootenay Boundary Farm Advisors and Community Connections up in Revelstoke and many others, because our policy not grounded in the actual work that happens in communities and on farms and in food systems is not actually going to achieve the goal of rebuilding resilient food systems. So I thought I'd give you just a quick overview of what the Food Policy Council does, and then we'll shift back to our main speakers for the session. And just so everyone knows, We're going to have each of the 4 speakers present about their work, and then at the end we'll have time for a question and answer. So if you have any questions for the individual speakers, please hold them and then be prepared to bring them forward at the end of the session. And actually, before we go further, I'm supposed to ask for a volunteer. If someone could put their hand up, we need someone who is willing to do a 1-minute report back to the main conference session at the end of today, I believe. And if you can maybe put your information in the chat, and Lisa will follow up with you and give you all the information. But a 1-minute report back on what you heard today would be really helpful for us to know about and for the rest of the conference participants to hear. So that said, I'm going to assume that someone will put their name in the chat, and Lisa will take care of that. And I'm going to move on to introducing my friend and wonderful animator in the region, providing incredible services. Rachael Roussin is the coordinator of Kootenay Boundary Farm Advisors. She's based out of Rossland, and I'm going to let her introduce herself any further and share what she has to share today.
Thank you for the introduction, Abra. Can you see my screen? Okay, so thank you. My name is Rachael. I coordinate the Kootenay Boundary Farm Advisor program. And I'm just waiting for my slide to advance here. Come on, there we go. There's so many things that I could have spoken about today. And you'll have to forgive me. You're going to have a slideshow that is very extensive because I have the privilege of working with many farms in our region through our program, the Kootenay Boundary Farm Advisors. And to get us started, what I am going to do is give you an overview of the Kootenay Boundary Farm Advisor program. But I'm not going to spend time talking about what we do. I thought this audience, and I'm speculating, would probably want to know most about what agriculture is taking place in our region. And because this is a climate symposium, talk a little bit about the climate impacts that some of our farmers in our region might be facing and some of the challenges ahead. So I'll talk about our program, Ag in the Kootenays, climate impacts, and go from there. So KBFA is an agricultural extension program that supports producers to improve agricultural production efficiency by helping find solutions to farm-specific production issues, coordinating educational events, and connecting producers to information. That's our main blurb. And I think what the most interesting thing about KBFA is we're actually funded in a 4-way funding partnership by the regional districts of Kootenay Boundary, Central Kootenay, East Kootenay, and Columbia Basin Trust. These 4 funding partners came together and collaborated 4 years ago to fund the Farm Advisor program in lieu of the fact that very few agricultural support services trickle down to small farms in the Kootenays. And this can primarily be based on our size and the diversity of farming that takes place here. Agricultural extension used to be a service provided by the government and no longer is. So it's really interesting that regional governments have stepped in to do this. We basically deliver agricultural extension services through the whole southeastern portion of the province as a result because of these 3 regional district areas. Just some of the very few things that we do communication with producers, we coordinate on-farm research, so we spend a lot of time leveraging relationships outside of our region and getting organizations and folks to work with producers inside of our region. And we coordinate a lot of field days that bring the agricultural community together to share their experiences and to bring in experts on, whatever the hot topics in ag are of the day. In this instance, we brought in this kind of a rock star grazer to talk about grazing and soil management. But often the experts are among us and they're the farmers in our backfields, and we just bring them together and farmers can share their experiences. So for example, this is an onion farmer in Grand Forks sharing his experience. And this is a market gardener on the right-hand side demonstrating how to build good hoop houses. And what I want to do is spend a little bit of time kind of talking about the type of farming that happens in our region, because I think it explains why we sort of have the farming that we do, which is small scale, labor intensive, and sort of limited by our topography. Here we have some photos of a market gardener in Invermere. We have berry producers. A market gardener, this is at the north end of Kootenay Lake. I should mention that these statistics are all over the place, and Abra will laugh because we don't know where this statistic came from, but that over 95% of our food is imported to the region. And I think that a lot of people, they think, why can't we produce more of our own food? And it's not that we can't produce more of food here, it's that the energy and resources required to produce food on a small scale in our variable landscapes and climate, it's challenging and it's hard. And every farmer out there is doing this because they love it, not because of the financial returns, that's for sure. And what you'll see in all of my photos is that these are family-based operations, and they are working at small scale. And furthermore, you will notice that these are once forested ecosystems. Any farmer who's working in these environments is needing to use innovation, creativity in order to make it work. So I'm just saying, and so yeah, these are photos of the Creston Valley here. You have tree fruits on one end of the valley and some of the flatter land for vegetable production. But once again, these are forested ecosystems. This is Salmo here, market garden on the left, small animals on the right. It's not that we can't produce food here, it's just that it takes innovation and a lot of energy to make it happen. And I always argue that all of these farmers are so small scale that they're always adapting and innovating to climate change on a day-to-day basis. And they're actually able to pivot really quickly to feed our communities. The biggest challenge facing them is actually profitability. It's not our changing climate. Garlic on the right in around Kootenay Lake, and on the left, we have forage producers in the boundary. So incredible diversity, hothouse cucumbers, diverse vegetables. And then some people aren't even farming outside, they're farming inside. So on the left, we have a specialty mushroom grower in Caslow. On the right-hand side, a microgreens producer in Rossland. So it's not that we don't have the innovation and the it's that all of these operations take an incredible amount of resources, time and energy and investment to make them happen. And the return on that investment is really small compared to other investments. And so, all of these photos that I showed you showed an incredible amount of infrastructure, but they're also very labor intensive due to our small scale sort of limiting factors of mountains, lakes, oceans, rivers, and this small plot intensive agriculture that we have here in the Kootenays. And if we think about big picture, I always find it interesting because a lot of people ask me, how does climate change impact Kootenay farms? It's not that it doesn't. I think that when we think about climate impacting agriculture, maybe we're thinking more about globalized food systems and how those impacts are going to impact outside systems that might make our food more vulnerable. But small scale farms in the Kootenays tend to be pretty resilient. And we actually just went through a large planning exercise with the BC Climate Action Initiative, who did an entire climate adaptation planning exercise for our region, and anybody can access these documents online. And what we talked about, some of the impacts to our small farms that are actually, they do have an impact on the bottom line of our small farms. So one thing that we're seeing is extreme weather, wind events. I feel like every market gardener on this call can identify with our hoop houses getting decimated by wind. Now small farms can rebuild, but this is expensive. Extreme weather, again, heavy rain, it wipes out crops, and it also impacts the length of growing that you have in your season, and it impacts your soil. So it impacts the quality of your crops, and then it also impacts the type of livestock that you can have, and you need to have more watering systems, etc. And it also means that your irrigation supplies can be threatened. And these are some of the real things that our farmers are facing today. Small scale water systems are drying up. And once again, though, the Kootenays are so diverse. You have some farmers who are on very large water systems and their water systems aren't threatened, but you have some farmers who are on really small, vulnerable water systems. And they're really looking at having to pivot quickly or not farm at all. Adaptations that we're seeing on the ground, farmers are protecting their crops more and more often because the weather is less predictable. So they have to protect from hail, extreme rain. They're changing their irrigation systems to be more efficient. They're protecting the soil, so they have to irrigate less. Oops, sorry. And they're doing a lot of mulching practices to try to conserve soil moisture. This is actually a very large dairy in Creston, and they are noticing the climate changing rapidly and that their soils are drying out. So they're trying to incorporate more mulch layers to conserve soil moisture. And more structures. I think most farmers out there, they know that if they want to have a reliable crop that isn't going to get decimated, they're putting up more structures. They can extend the season and they can also protect their crops. And once again, these are expensive investments. These are really, they're meaningful investments for farms. But once we saw with those extreme weathers, like this isn't the old days where you can just pop up a crappy little pop-up tent. Wind is going to blow those away. So farmers are investing in real big structures, very significant investments so that they can have more predictable weather around their crop growing. And they're doing this, and they're doing it well, and they're doing it successfully, and they are growing fantastic crops. Another one is we're seeing a lot of farmers being very interested in growing their soil and investing in their soil health, because healthy soil adds to increased resilience of your soil moisture, and just like it helps control your nutrient cycling and everything. And in our program, we get a lot of questions about soil health, and we do a lot of workshops around that as well. And I think it's important to note that when we have small farms producing our food, they are stewards of their land, and they are really investing in the long-term production of food in this region.
Rachael, you've got 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Other adaptations we're seeing are farms doing on-farm research about climate resilience. This is Bentall Farm, and they're doing a climate adaptation project with UBC Farm. And they're looking at how using tarps can help, no one likes to see plastic, but it also, how tarps can help get into the soil faster, how they can help with nutrient cycling, especially with these more extreme flooding and wet weather events that we have. And some conclusions, I know that this is like a whirlwind presentation, trying to fit it all in, but some of these conclusions are that farmers are providing for us, they are stewards of the land, and the investments that they're making to be farmers in this area take a long time. If we want a resilient food system, these are investments that farmers are putting decades of work into. And if we run out of food, we can't just grow food tomorrow. We need structures. We need small-scale livestock holdings. And I think, and then here's a picture of Tyler, who's presenting later. He's a perfect example of his farm's been investing for almost a decade now in infrastructure. On the left-hand side, that's a winter hog waterer that doesn't freeze. Well, these are investments in our region to support small-scale agriculture, and we need to start today to make those investments if we're going to have agriculture taking place in our region. And some of the great things that we've seen is like Columbia Basin Trust with the pandemic just recently stepped up with some wage subsidy programs to help small scale farms. And that really does make a difference to the bottom line, because like I said, climate's not the main threat, it's profitability. And we've seen some other small supports come out for small farms that just haven't been available in the last couple of decades. This is just a plug. If anybody wants to stay in touch with the Kootenay and Boundary Farm Advisors, we do have a bi-monthly newsletter that you can stay tuned in and read farmer profiles and know about the events that we coordinate with the agricultural community. And thanks for the whirlwind there. There's Abra and I at an outreach booth, my contact information, and feel free to get in touch.
Thanks so much, Rachael. I'm thrilled that you're at the head of the Kootenay Boundary Farm Advisors program. You've been providing so much value to the farmers. Oops.
I realized I can't really talk about agriculture in the region in like 10 minutes, but maybe this time for we could do a 5-hour presentation.
Next time.
Yeah.
So if you can stop sharing your screen, I'll introduce our next speaker. So our next speaker is an equally impressive woman up in Revelstoke. Melissa Hemphill has been leading the food security work up in Revelstoke through community connections for quite a few years now. And she's going to give the perspective from a community base about how food resilient she is and what her experience has been over the years. So thank you, Melissa.
Oh, thank you. You can see my screen?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, great. So I hope that everybody here has an understanding of the importance of developing local food systems in order to address climate change. And if that connection is a bit fuzzy for you, trust me, it's important. And I'm going to talk about how to develop that. But there's lots of information out there that really shows that a local food system is important for climate change adaptation and mitigation. So on that premise, I'm going to talk about the Revelstoke recipe for developing a local food system and what we've done up here. So some of the key strategies that I focus on in my work is to just grow more food. And when growing more food, doing it in a sustainable way with environmental considerations that also help with that profitability in the long term. We of course want to decrease food imports, so focusing on local foods and recognizing that there's important parts to our food system that come from faraway land. Like, I don't want to never taste a mango again in my life, but that doesn't need to be the major focus of my diet. We also want to decrease waste, and whether that's food waste or packaging, anything around options to decrease food waste or waste in the food system is important. And for that waste that's unavoidable, managing it well. Feeding food waste to animals first, then composting, managing our recycling responsibly, and just recognizing and closing that loop on waste within the food system. And ultimately shifting the cultural diet so that we are eating more seasonally, eating more locally, eating more wholesome food, getting away from a rich animal-based diet and processed food. So health outcomes and cultural outcomes from that as well. So I take a layered approach to this work. There's lots of community work to do of building programs and policies and working with local folks, but a small rural community in the interior does not make a food system on its own. So I think it's very important to work regionally. That's why I work really closely with Abra and Rachael, and then broadening that out to the provincial scope and what's happening with the Ministry of Agriculture, with the Agricultural Land Commission, advising, talking about what's happening on the ground locally, and allowing that to move up the hierarchy of government. And then of course the national level too, in terms of coalitions and petitions and federal policy. So I like to work at all of those layers to some degree, but the focus is definitely on the community level. So as the food security coordinator in my community, it's a bit of a unique position. There are a few other communities that are taking this approach, and I'm a big fan of it. I think it's a really important position to animate and support the growth of a local food system. So I get to work with the growers and the retailers. I get to look at it from an economic development standpoint in terms of job creation and business supports. I get to look at the charitable side of how we support those who are having trouble affording food. I get to work with those home gardeners and the self-sufficiency folks at building that household food security. And then on the community level of how we come together around food, how we give food value, and what we do together with food. So I have a little recipe here for you, just 4 easy steps to grow your local food system. So we'll go through those. So step 1, and these steps do not end They all work concurrently, but I think that step one is building the understanding of the impacts of the food system on household food insecurity and everything else in your community. There's social impacts, there's economic impacts, and there's environmental impacts. The more you can build that understanding in your community through articles, presentations, sharing resources, the more that other leaders and stakeholders in the community can understand that food plays a part of their work, no matter what they're doing. And this can lead to some strategic partnerships, to different funding allocations and tie-ins with different policies and all kinds of things. So the broader you can build the scope of understanding around food and its effects in your community, the further you can push that needle and getting us towards a sustainable food system. Step two is the fun side. I like to think of the community development, the development of community programming. So there's two sides to this in my eyes. One is the household food insecurity side. And so this is helping those folks who are living in poverty or struggling with food access to bolster that for their well-being, to allow them to better participate in community and in their own lives and in their own relationships. So this is things like food banks and soup kitchens, bringing people together with free or inexpensive community meals, breaking bread together is so important, utilizing surplus food and food recovery to bolster any programming that you have. This is not about feeding garbage food to poor people by any means. This is about using food that's underutilized in the community to support folks who are having access challenges. Just reducing food waste. But on the household food insecurity side, that's where we're talking about it today. Also participating in market coupon programs so that you're giving those folks who are challenged with poverty and you know, the dollar bills to participate in a local food system, the opportunity to do that and to then access healthy, local, often organically produced food, which is wonderful, and pumps lots of money into your local food economy, which is great. And then, of course, the school breakfast programs, making sure that kids have the best opportunity to reach their potential in their school day by not having to worry about food. So that's kind of the food insecurity side of things. The other side of programming is around the community food security. So everybody else who's not living in poverty and how do they participate? And I think that's a three-pronged approach. That's education, that's school programming, it's gardening workshops, it's film festivals, it's learning about food and connecting to it. And then providing the opportunity to grow. So community gardens, school gardens, making sure people have seeds, making sure they know how to compost and the importance of that, protecting our pollinators and just growing more food on a community level rather than a commercial level. And then the last but not least, definitely my favorite part is the celebrating. So whether that's feasts in the field, tours of gardens and farms, participating in broader events, but showing up as the food folks, and all the fun parts that come with celebrating local food and those that are involved in doing it. And by doing that, you increase the value of local food, the appreciation for it, the connection to it, the face-to-face relationship with farmers and processors. So it's feeding your soul, not just your body, to be eating local food. Step three of building your local food system is supporting food business. And why we may have a challenge with how a nonprofit organization is supporting food businesses, we've economized food. So we have to just be okay with that for now and do our best with it. So my favorite part of this is networking with the chefs and with the farmers and making sure they have what they need to be successful and contribute to the local food system. And so that's tapping into Rachael and her program at KBFA. It's tapping into ministry resources and training resources and just making sure they come to Revelstoke. The processors and farmers don't have time to organize training events or even travel out of town to attend them. So having some help bringing those resources here is really helpful. Connecting with the business side of the community with community futures and startup resources, the fabrication lab, the Basin Business Advisors, their agriculture specialists. So connecting those in the food sector with those specialists to further their business. And that's the complexity of it. When you have a food business, not only do you need to know your industry, but your business skills as well. And that can be really challenging skill sets to bring together. So utilizing those supports. It doesn't do any good to be producing local food if you don't have a place to sell it. So ensuring that there's good, robust, well-managed markets and that they can tap into programs like the coupon program to support what they're doing. And then there's the infrastructure side of it. Do we have the commercial kitchens, the transportation systems for both food and for people, storage facilities, all that sort of infrastructure that is usually challenging for a small food business to approach on their own? Can we utilize collaborations and partnerships to develop that local infrastructure? So we've got the building the understanding, building the community programming, supporting those food businesses, and that momentum that comes from doing all of that work then gives local government and industry the courage and impetus to develop policies to then perpetuate all of that work and that priority on our most basic need. And so that's where I'm coming to in Revelstoke right now, is getting into that world of policy development, which is scary and exciting. But my approach is thinking about, how are we growing food, how, where, why, who, how are we processing food? What is all the elements to that we need to tie into? How are we selling our food, and how do we make that easy for food producers to do? And then also looking at the purchasing side. Are there institutional procurement agreements? Are there buy local policies that we can develop, just to kind of complete that loop of the food system? It doesn't do anybody any good to just grow the food. We've got to use it ourselves as well. So that's my 4 steps: building the understanding, developing the programming, supporting the businesses, and then developing that policy to build in the robustness and longevity of it all. So I listed off all kinds of programs and all kinds of stuff on there. If you'd like to dig into it more, you can check out revelstokelocalfood.com. That's the Revelstoke Local Food Initiative, and they're the grassroots organization that does a lot of that community programming. And then communityconnections.ca. That's the main social service agency here in town, where I work under, working on mostly that food insecurity side of things, but also implementing our food security strategy and all of the elements that go into that. So there's a bit of information on that website as well. So thanks for your time.
Thanks, Melissa. I've been blown away by Melissa's work and all she accomplishes as a one-woman food security whiz up in Revelstoke since she first exploded into my food realm, and I'm so grateful that she's part of our the region.
Well, and I wanted to mention, Abra, that diagram that you showed at the beginning with the complexity of the food system, that it's been a lot of your tutelage and bringing people together to share those resources that allows me to do that work. So that element of convening regionally has been exceptionally helpful.
Thank you. So now we're going to move on to the farmers. The farmer voices are obviously a really vital part of the conversation about how resilient our food systems are. And as Rachael clearly indicated, climate change is significantly impacting what happens at the level of the farm. So we're going to start out in Blewett with Emma Sowiak.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me, and thanks Abra and Rachael and Melissa. Certainly seeing your slide, Abra, about the food policy kind of makes me want to get into food policy. And, kind of food is such a fascinating topic because it concerns us all, and it's so important, and there's so many different aspects of it to delve into. But I am very privileged to consider myself a farmer. I'm going to share my screen here. Just with a few photos. My partner and I, Scott, we run Bentall Farm, which is just outside of Nelson. We're very lucky to be just 15 minutes from our farmers market. which has been so key to kind of building our customer base and getting food to the people. We are a small scale, kind of like Rachael said. We farm kind of about 2 acres. We are very lucky to be on a forested property that's about 60 acres in total, but sort of our arable land is about 2-3 acres. So we have a little bit of room to grow, but it's small and it's rocky and it's a forest ecosystem, which has its challenges and its joys. We started farming in Ontario. Scott is from Eastern Ontario, the Ottawa Valley. And it was very interesting for us to move our farm business to BC, especially to the West Kootenays, where I'm from Nelson, because of the difference in scale. We had still a small, like 1 acre market garden, but beside us was corn, and on the other side was soy, hundreds of acre sized operations. So to come to the West Kootenays and sort of meet all the local farmers who are all doing like small scale market gardens or smaller scale livestock operations was really neat. But it meant that we had the challenges of, oh, where do we access our, all of our inputs? Can we get enough inputs to grow our vegetables? What is, our water setup? We asked a lot of questions in those early days, and we were very privileged to have the capital investment to sort of start it off on a good foot, because our second time starting a farm, we knew what we needed to be able to grow food. We kind of come to this, we're fairly new to the farming scene, and we kind of come to it, because of our interest and concern over the climate crisis. And in a lot of ways, we really couldn't see ourselves doing anything else. We love growing food. We love that it puts us in a position where we feel like we can have a positive effect on our community, not only like in the healthy food that we grow, but also kind of minimizing our carbon impact in the global climate. And that's sort of those two pieces, the climate crisis and kind of wanting to support local food systems, are kind of at the core of our business. Let's see. Last year, I suppose, was our third season growing in Nelson and for the Nelson and surrounding community. And through the pandemic, I think we really saw Nelson in particular, and the West Kootenays has always, in my mind, had a strong focus on local food. But certainly last year we saw an uptick in sort of how people were thinking about where their food was coming from sort of the panicked phone calls that we got in early spring, being like, can I buy hundreds of pounds of beets right now? To people who were just who realized that, maybe they should make the change this year and start supporting local food more. So we sell primarily through a community supported agriculture box, which means that we deliver 20 weeks of vegetables. These are 3 sample photos of the types of kind of your mixed range of vegetables that you get in each box each week. Very much helping people eat seasonally. They start off very green and then they get more colorful and heavier as the squash and the potatoes and the carrots start to bulk up. And then we also attend the Nelson Farmers Market. We're still growing in our business at this point, just being 3 years in at this property. So we were planning to grow this past year, but we saw such a huge demand from our community to deliver more food boxes. And so in a way we pivoted and we grew that side of our business more this year to sort of meet that demand. We went from 20 CSA customers to about 80. And this year we'll probably come in around 100 food boxes that we're delivering to our community. Yeah, like Rachael was saying, you know, a big piece of farming in the Kootenays is profitability. And, you know, we're working towards that and trying to figure out how we can be more profitable. But then I'm sort of looking at too here, like, you know, the types of things that we do on our farm to sort of mitigate or adapt to the climate. And I think certainly as farmers, farmers have always had to adapt to the environment. You know, farming, it's very much an integral part. You know, if you have a heavy, wet spring and cold, you know, you're going to have to adapt to that every year. But certainly things that we've seen recently is like having smokier seasons, extended periods of smoke. We've noticed an effect on our crops in terms of like how they photosynthesize and, you know, how they grow, how things ripen. Any extremes we have to adapt to. And so there's sort of a few different ways that we approach this. And for us, one is diversification. So we have being a small market style garden, we grow 60 plus different varieties of crops, different species, like hybrid species to open pollinated species. You know, always kind of 2 varieties of each crop. We do crop rotations so that, you know, we're avoiding pest and disease, which can be a little bit tricky on our small scale. It's always kind of a jigsaw puzzle, a little bit when we're planning in the early season. Another way is irrigation management. We're very fortunate to be on a gravity-fed creek line, but our creek is very much based on the snowpack. And so if we had less snow one year, you know, how are we going to kind of mitigate that? And so a lot of our future projects include like how we can be efficient about our water use and how we can kind of grow, you know, crops that don't need tons and tons of water, but also kind of a lot of it comes down to the soil building piece. You know, building a soil that can retain that moisture, sequester the carbon, not blow through our inputs. You know, so if we're adding nitrogen compost, is like, we don't want that to be just disappear through the soil. So kind of building the holding capacity for our soil has been a big piece of our farm the last few years, just in that we are in a forested system, as you can kind of see around us there, our little plot. And we're kind of dealing with like class 6 morainal till soil that's sandy and has boulders in it, and not a lot of organic matter to start. And so we're slowly building that with cover crops. Here in this photo, you can kind of see a buckwheat cover crop. We're, you know, always kind of testing out new strategies to build that soil. And then looking at the broader picture, we're a small, in a lot of ways, you know, being a small scale farm is a great step towards, you know, lowering our carbon impact. But we, you know, even still, we can do our part in kind of lowering our off-farm inputs, supporting renewable and electric energies, and maintaining and strengthening our ecosystems. Scott was very keen this year. We got an electric Ranger, which we kind of now use as our main farm vehicle. we just have, for doing a lot of our farming, we just have a small walk behind tractor, but we're really starting to minimize the amount of tillage that we're doing. So we mostly end up just using it for mowing down crops, a little bit of plowing here and there, but looking at ways that we can, lessen our fuel impact there. Cover crops, it's kind of always fit into the piece of the puzzle that when we try and plan our crop rotations, whether that's acting as a green manure or a mulch, as kind of Rachael was showing in some of her photos, or as like a nitrogen fixing, helping to fix some nitrogen, or just helping to keep the soil covered and keep that carbon in the soil.
Emma, you've got 2 minutes, thanks.
All right. We're also very lucky, the challenges that come with being a forested operation also benefit us too. We don't have to deal with too much wind, thankfully, or erosion. We kind of are able to manage the forest and, sort of keep that as sort of like a carbon sequestering part of our operation as well. And it's a really kind of unique little system. Here's a picture of some of the boulders that we pull out on a regular basis. So we're just trying to build soil, grow some good veggies, and then looking ahead, strengthening the local food shed in any way that we can, whether that's collaborating with other farmers, collaborating, to get a big order of carrots into the food bank, helping sort of make it so that our veggies can stay in the community and give our community members like access to local food so that they have that option. And it's really in kind of shortening those food chains that make a huge difference. As Rachael said, like we're doing research with UBC, and we've done a couple other studies of our own, working on biochar experiments, anything that kind of can push us forward as a small farm to grow and adapt and hopefully be able to do this for the longer term. And I think that's all that I have on my slides. Yep, that was my last one.
Thanks so much, Emma. As I said in the chat, I'm one of their CSA members and their food is wonderful. So Emma, I'll just get you to stop showing your screen and then we'll bring on our last farmer. So it's my pleasure to introduce our final farmer of the panel, and that's Tyler McNaughton. If you'd like to come on, I'll let you talk about yourself and your farm and pass it off. I also very much enjoy the products of Tyler and Sacha's farm, and anybody who has a chance to eat them, I know you'll enjoy them. Wendy has asked, with increased suburbanization of Kootenay valleys, what can be done to protect agricultural land and the ALR? Since I'm going to be trying to negotiate Tyler's presentation, Rachael, do you mind taking that question?
Yeah, so how to protect the agricultural land reserve. Very political, very challenging question. I mean, I think the ALR really does have good protections in place. I think that we just need to advocate that that under no circumstance with any change of government that ALR be threatened. Because what we see when we have a change in politics, and we've seen this many times, people try to change the format of the ALR. And as citizens, we just need to stand behind the Agricultural Land Commission to at least maintain that it is an important asset. You know, British Columbia is so unique in the fact that we even have the ALR. And so we need to make sure that it doesn't dissolve under any circumstance. I'm not saying that it can't tweak and change for the needs of farmers, because I know that some farmers do feel that the ALR provides some limitations to what they can do on their own land. So it needs to, you know, maintain for agriculture, but also listen to farmers. But I can hear that the challenges. Yeah, Melissa, go ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying, Rachel. And I think a way to do that in a robust manner is through local policy. And so getting statements into your official community plan that protect agricultural land, then guides when communities are consulted by the ALC about removal from ALR. Any land that applies gets the local government gets a bit of a thumbs up or thumbs down opportunity to weigh in on it. And so if you've got some local policy around that, and I think probably in order to get that, you need some education for your councillors and your city staff to understand what the ALR is and the importance and longevity of it.
Thanks, Melissa and Rachel. So there's another question from Greg Rose, and he wants to know, how small is small enough? Are there examples in your regions where small-scale agriculture is closer or inside communities, which would decrease energy costs, etc.? So would you like, anyone like to jump in on that? And I'll keep negotiating with Tyler.
I could start on that one. I don't think there is such thing as too small, because while I'm yet to witness somebody who starts food production and, you know, it doesn't grow it over time. And so I think supporting anything on any scale is going to lead to bigger change over time.
So Tyler has had success. Thank you for taking the questions, and thank you everyone for your patience. So Tyler, if you'd like to go ahead, you can get started.
All right, it was, I wasn't allowing access to Zoom, so here we go. All right, thank you for your patience. My name is Tyler McNaughton. My wife and partner and I, Sacha, there she is. Sacha is the president and CEO and financial manager of Cutter Ranch, so that's her. Sacha and I started Cutter Ranch in about 2008. We were both from farming backgrounds. Myself, I'm from a dairy farm originally near Winnipeg, attended the University of Manitoba Faculty of Agriculture, Ag Economics, and Environmental Science. We both wanted to get back into farming because it's a way, it was very important to us, and it's something that we wanted to do as a lifestyle and raise our family. How we initially got into farming was, or got into our own farm, is we needed to get into something that was cost effective and something that we could do right away. We had limited capital. We essentially started it up ourselves. So we thought, well, let's buy 30 sheep and rent a piece of property. And we found a piece of family property that we could rent. And we started off with 30 sheep and a direct selling model, which is basically, it's essentially our model still today. We direct market everything to end users, to restaurants, grocery stores, cafes, bistros, you name it. So we started off with 30 sheep. We eventually, over a decade or so, we grew that to about 200 ewes. When we started farming, we worked at our rental property until about 2012, at which point that we were able to buy our own farm in the East Kootenays. That was on a quarter, that is on a quarter section, and had all the tools and the water that we scale the sheep operation. Anecdotally, those numbers, like if you want to be fully employed by your farm, that number, believe it or not, was about 700 sheep. We wanted to be fully, we want to live fully off of our farm and not have our farm jobs. It's not entirely uncommon for farmers to have off-farm jobs, but in order for us to have a farm marketing business and raise the products we want to sell, we have to be wholly employed by the farm. One of the first things we did was we put up a greenhouse. There was essentially no barn on the property to lamb out in, and we put up a greenhouse. So if we're talking ways to mitigate climate change or use less energy, boy, I tell you, I'm surprised everybody doesn't have a greenhouse. We love our greenhouse. We still use it for calving out today with our calves. We took a stab at raising vegetables to try and make this greenhouse work year round. And as the meat business grew, we found that you're either a meat producer or you're a vegetable farmer. So we were more adept at meat production. How we got into it, how we had to identify, how we got into the farm, we had to identify, well, what's the avenue we wanted to go. And in 2008, there was this sort of really burgeoning industry, I guess, where people wanted connectivity to their food. And it was really as simple as looking at our own tastes and preferences. We couldn't find the stuff in stores that we wanted. And if we started in a small way with those 30 sheep and reach out to customers and develop a customer base within our own group, we wanted to see how it worked out, and it worked out pretty well. And as it turns out, that was the case. And here we are in 2021, and we're making a go of it. As I said earlier, we really wanted this to be a family endeavor. That was really important to us. We wanted to have our kids raised on a farm. We have 2 daughters, now 7 and 9. Sacha and I were both raised on farms. That was pretty important to us. And sort of a general commentary on the well-being of people. I think I would love to see more people being raised on farms and more small farmers, because you just get a tremendous sense of purpose and well-being when you're farming in whatever way, shape, or form that is. We also were raising, a few years after we started raising some pigs. This kind of happened accidentally. We had a couple of sows. Again, we couldn't find the type of pork meat that we wanted in stores, so we started raising it. We started selling it to a few friends to cover costs. The meat turned out really well. People were really pleased with it. We fed them a really good diet. We had them in really good living conditions. That's also a really important tenet of our farm, is animal welfare, both coming from livestock operations. I've been and seen on just about every livestock farm imaginable. I've been on hundreds of farms in my life, and you get to know what you want pretty quick. And rather than, I guess, treating these animals as an externality or any part of your farm for that matter, there's a pretty quick payoff. The better you treat these animals and the better that you treat your land, the better it's going to treat you. I can't really put it any other way. Our cost of inputs are lower because our animals are healthier, few or no vet bills. We have better soil fertility, better water management. So this notion of environmental stewardship is a pretty important tenet on our farm. Raising the pigs, we're take down old grain bins, turn them into hoop shelters or half-round shelters here, using, we've all seen this, or maybe some of you have seen this, using a couple of electric wires and hand watering and hand feeding. This became pretty untenable very quickly, so we really had to figure out a way how to scale up. A lot of what we do is dictated based on, really good sound business principles. Is this thing going to be profitable? So, and we have to account pretty heavily for our time. Is it going to produce the product that we want? So this is how we built our model, matching methodology with desired outcome. I guess this is essentially working backwards. What do we want to see in 10 years from now? We have to deconstruct that process and figure out how we want to start. And I think this just comes from really good design. I think if you're starting out farming, or if you're farming now, you have to give yourself credit to design something really, really good. It's one thing to have a passion, but you have to have a very functional product, or you have to have a very functional farm, because it's what's that saying? Form follows function, I guess. So this is what we really put our minds to, and also is is your farm or production scalable? We love our local and small farm food system, but we also have to have some pretty sound business practices too. I guess it's our belief that if we have a really good sound business and there's a future and it's scalable, that's going to be better off for everybody, because we can grow our production, you know, to have our abattoir slaughter more animals, to our local stores and grocery stores have more product to be able to sell on a regular basis. So we really put a lot of effort and energy into having a really good sound farm business in concert with a farm that's got some really good production principles. So Rachael touched on this a little bit earlier when we're talking about ways to either deal with climate change or mitigate climate change. We always had our eye to what is the most economical way we can do something. It might not be cheap. It might not be cheap to do. It might be very expensive. In most cases, it was expensive, but we looked at this as an investment, because we're looking at a 20 or 30-year time period that we want to continue farming. So we, and as part of our environmental stewardship too, we landed here on a pretty pristine farm, had great water and great grass. So we really wanted to preserve that at all costs. So hogs can be pretty intensive on land, and one of the ways to keep them off water, keep them contained, and have also reliable water as a matter of, you know, as a matter of a good production process, because we don't want disruptions in our process, is we developed this sort of hybrid sort of geothermal electric waterer. So we sunk these municipal water tubes down about 6 feet. They provide an incredible amount of heat to come up. So there's less reliance on the heater element inside the water unit herself. We've been slowly but surely placing these all around the farm as we develop our rotational hog system, which I'll get to in a minute. So we have a couple of creeks running through the farm. Also in conjunction with the cattle operation, we're slowly but surely fencing off as much of these creeks to maintain riparian areas, and also have off-creek watering systems too for the cattle. So swine scale,
Tyler,
this is a really sort of easy example in pictures to show you how we did this. We needed to scale up because if we, yeah, go ahead.
We're just about at time. This is Abra. We're just about at time.
I'm with you.
So I know that we started late, but if you can
right
wrap
now.
it up in the next couple minutes, that'd be great.
Hello?
Hey, Tyler, can you hear me? This is Abra.
Okay.
Couple minutes,
Okay.
and then you
All
have to
right.
wrap up.
All
Carry
right.
on, but just a couple more minutes, okay?
Okay, here we go. Okay, so this is really, I can hear you.
And we can
Got
hear
it.
you.
Okay. Got it. Yeah, I'll be real quick. So on the swine end, we developed a fully rotational, and you can hear me? Good. Okay. We developed a fully rotational and modular system. We imported these, if you can look on the lower left-hand screen, these arcs. They're insulated. In the summertime, we don't bed them up. We have them directly on the grass. In 30-degree days, they keep the hogs completely cool. And in the wintertime, we bed them up, and even at -30, they're completely warm. So we wanted a system that we could rotate the hogs off of to periodic, with a fair amount of frequency, because we don't want to overburden the soil and the carrying capacity. So I set this system up in about 2 hours last summer, and here was Rachael, showed up that evening to have a look at it, and we can, same thing, take that system down and move it as much as we need to. And it also allows us to have larger numbers of hogs in quicker periods of time. And after those hogs, we can plant a barley crop, because fodder is pretty important on our farm, because we always want to keep cover crop in, and we can be a net importer of nutrients and have less reliance on synthetic fertilizer. And over time, we hope to eliminate that right off of our farm. So here's a wintertime picture. This allowed us, again, just investing in the equipment and the tools allows us to have continuity of production, because that's really if what a local food system needs is you need consistent production you know, and as much as you can year round. So, and I'll just wind up here. We got out of the sheep a few years ago because we couldn't scale, and we basically took that capital and bought a cow herd. And obtaining a grazing lease, we can keep those cattle off farm for half the year on the Crown grazing lease, and we can still fulfill you know, all the demand that we have for beef, and that's pretty steadily growing too. So this is a picture of a Crown lease, and my daughter and I riding just to go check and herd the cattle when we're moving them from paddock to paddock. So and I think that's about it. Building solid partnerships. We've built a great network of customers here in the East Kootenays. 95% of the product that we produce, and it's well over 100,000 pounds of meat now a year, is sold within a couple hours of the farm to direct sales, grocery stores, cafes and stuff, as I said before. So, and we rely heavily upon these relationships, and you know, our customers have treated us very well over the years, and have enabled us to build a really good, you know, and profitable to a degree too. And that's it. Sacha and I love to ride horses, and so there, I think that covers it. If there's anybody has any questions.
Thanks so much, Tyler. Those are awesome pictures. Such an impressive hog rotation you've got.
All right.
There. Thank you very much, Tyler.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So if you could stop sharing your screen, we'll bring up all the speakers. And those who want to remain, we can go a few minutes over, I've been told. So if there's any more questions, I'll do my best to keep an eye on the chat and direct them at whoever wants. Oh, and please, is anyone who's participating willing to do the 1-minute summary? We need a volunteer for the 1-minute summary to the larger conference of the outcomes of this session. Anything you got excited about or wanted to share. Please let Lisa know that you are able to do so. Okay, I'm going to check out the chat. Don't know that there's any new questions in there, but anybody want to direct anything at the speakers?
Can I just unmute myself and ask a question?
I believe so. Go for it.
It's for Tyler, and I was wondering what's the furthest distance you might be transporting, or your hog, your protein products would be transported from your farm? Do you have any idea?
Tyler, you're still muted.
There we go. Yeah, great question. As I said, about 95% of it. Okay, I shouldn't be.
You're good.
Okay. Are we good? Yeah, 95% of our product is sold within a couple hours of the farm. We do have some yeah, okay. It's 95% of our product is sold within a couple hours of the farm. So basically within the Basin region, from our farm to Golden, I think the furthest west we go is Nelson, Fernie area. We do have some customers in Vancouver that would be categorized in that 5% of customer range, and I'm sure it's even less than that. So it's within a couple hours.
Thanks, Tyler. There's a question from
Does that answer your question?
Great, thanks. Definitely a lag in the audio here. There's a question from Melissa from Ingrid. She's asking, what aspect are you seeing the biggest need for policy in your local work, and what is your advice for other communities on where to focus policy efforts at the beginning of reconstructing local food systems?
Here in Revelstoke, I think the most urgent need is policy around urban agriculture. Because of the geography and the mountainscape that we're on, the availability of land within the municipal boundary is so limited that we need to be able to grow food in the community and sell it on site. I think that's the biggest need and a good place to start for municipality to urge small businesses to get rolling and get started. And maybe that's backyard beehives. Maybe that's a mushroom growing operation in their basement. Maybe that's a small scale market garden in their backyard that they can put a table out on their driveway and sell some food from, just to help people get into it, because it's a labor of love. And so if you can support people from the very, very beginning of it and allow it to grow from there, I think that's a good place to start.
Thanks, Melissa. Ben, I see that you asked if you can ask another question, but I've got one more from someone else before I go back to you. Jesse Woodward was going to do the 1 minute report, but he's just remembered he has to pick up a child. And so if anyone else is willing to volunteer to do the 1 minute summary, that would be awesome. The question is from Laura Sachs to anyone. It seems we need to figure out scaling up local farming. The biggest challenges in our area that I see is farmer burnout and access to land. And I know Laura, as a former farmer and landowner, knows that well. So anyone like to address that?
Speak a little bit to that, just in that I think to sort of help with that is really the supports needed, especially for new farmers that want to get into the game, to access capital. There was recently a small pilot program from the government to do a 75% cost share for infrastructure pieces. And I think more and more of that can help farmers scale up without kind of burning out too much and trying to do it all by hand or kind of hack things together. So kind of helping farmers access those infrastructure pieces has helped our farm and has been really great to help us avoid burnout.
Thanks, Emma. Anybody else want to comment?
Well, I have a comment too, just on the burnout part. I think that we all underestimate how much labor is required to have a profitable, well-functioning farm, and labor is so expensive. And until just recently, most of the wage subsidy programs available to farms weren't very compatible for agriculture in our region. I mean, they were, but they were like student programs, so the time was limited, or they had to be a certain age. And what you really need on farms is like continuous skilled labor that comes back every season, and you need to pay them a fair wage. And that having good help and good labor will help mitigate farmer burnout and will also increase production. And as I said in my presentation, we inherently have like high labor needs for ag here because we're not very mechanized, because we have these small pockets of arable land. And man, you don't want to run a big tractor on Emma's land, you know, the stones are in the way and all that stuff. So I think really looking at where farmers need that support will help increase production in our region.
Thanks, Rachel. And just a shout out to the Columbia Basin Trust. They did an amazing job of making wage subsidies available last year with the outbreak of the pandemic. And I think there's a lot of hope that they'll do it again this year, because for many farms, it made a huge difference. It meant they could actually take some of the funds they would otherwise have put towards labor and invested in farm infrastructure. So those kinds of supports are really vitally important. And it's great that the Columbia Basin Trust really stepped up there. I just see Jesse has his hand up, and then I'll go back to Ben. So Jesse.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Thank you for the presentation. I was wondering, so essentially what was delivered here was that the bulk of the farms are actually small scale in this area. So large, sort of the model of like large scale farming, large scale inputs is not actually what's needed. And what's really needed here is a really organized small scale farm production support system, whether it be employee support system, better supports from federal and provincial governments to the local farmers here. In terms of small, it is small scale what we're talking about here. Is that are there large scale farms in this region, or is it all pretty much small scale?
Well, everything's relative.
Yes.
Right.
It depends on how you define it. I mean, our mountains get in the way.
Yeah.
I was in a session with farmers last night, and up in the Peace, they're talking about 4,000 acres of grain production, and in the Creston Valley, it's 40 acres of grain production.
Right.
There's a dramatic difference because of our mountains, and that's just the reality. And in terms of what's really going to support the rebuilding of our food resiliency here, like I would go back to the diagram that I put up at the beginning of the session. It's not one thing, it's many, many different elements. And it's going to require everyone to be participating. And most of all, I think really aggressively supporting our farmers. Because if we're not properly compensating them for all of their investment and their labor and the incredible product that they bring to us, then they're not sustainable. They can't be around next year and next year. And so we need new farmers, but I think most vitally, we have to support the farmers that are currently in operation, because there's so much investment of time and knowledge that we would be at great peril to lose. So I tend to privilege supporting the existing farmers and trying to understand what they need. And a big part of it is local government. It's all levels of government. It's eaters. It's everybody. I think because we're well over time, I'm going to take one more question from Ben, and then I'm going to invite Lisa to just invite everyone back into the conference. So Ben, your last question.
Sure. Thanks, Abra. Hi, folks. Ben Clark here from Victoria. And we are in the process of setting up a regional food policy council, kind of building on the work in the last 20 years of a lot of different organizations. But I just wanted to kind of bring it back to the theme of this conference and ask, how can we kind of create or evolve a regional food policy council in a way that bridges silos and kind of takes into account the needs of small business and climate interests?
Well, I'm going to jump in as the head of a regional food policy council in the Central Kootenay. I do think there's a lot of food policy councils out there, but many of them don't focus that effectively on policy itself, because it's really, really hard to fund policy and food systems analysis work. There's virtually no one out there willing to fund it unless you've got a really good working relationship with your local government. They tend to be the only ones who see value there if you can demonstrate it to them. And so many food policy councils end up being involved in emergency food provisioning, in community garden and educational activities. And I think those are really, really important, but it tends to create some confusion about what a food policy council actually does and where it needs to prioritize. And I'm well aware, because I've known Linda Gegge for a really long time, the amazing work that the Capital Regional Food and Agricultural Initiatives Roundtable has done. It's a great convener and has done extraordinary work in the area. And there's also other great organizations in your neck of the woods. But I think making sure that you're clear on your mandate as a food policy council and bringing together all the different components of the food system into your council so that you're being fed all those different information pieces so you can do that kind of and cross analysis, as well as bringing the sort of what's the policy piece, where's the policy problem we need to solve, and either take it to local government where there's a lot more direct democracy possible, or work with them to advocate to other levels of government. And so I think just being really clear on the opportunities and the scope of policy work is really important, which is why we do so much work at our Food Policy Council in educating. This is what policy is. This is what food policy is. This is where it resides across the landscape of governments. So I'm happy to follow up with anybody else who's interested in creating a regional food policy council. In our small communities, it doesn't make sense to do it at just a local urban level. And so I think that it's important. And we also created a governance model to ensure we had broad representation across food systems and community needs around our tables to guide our work. So happy to follow up later. At this point, we need to wrap up. We're definitely over time. Lisa